Welcome to edgeofcode.com series of infinite roller tutorials. You can find a written version of this tutorial at edgeofcode.com if you prefer. So in the previous tutorial we created a menu using Unity's UI system. This time we'll randomise the height of the terrain because at the moment we've just got flat terrain that will go on forever, which isn't a very exciting thing for a game. So we could do this in various ways. We could vary the height of each ground piece. So each of these pieces could be set at a different random height to create a sort of step-like effect. Or we could randomise the height of each chunk so that each block of ground is at the same random height. Because of how we've created the gaps in this terrain though, this would mean that each pair of visible ground pieces, so like this bit and this bit, or this bit and this bit, each pair of visible ground pieces within a chunk would be the same height. So instead of this, I'm going to write code to pick a different random height for each visible section within a chunk. So this would be one height, this would be another height. And I'll use the height of the second section to be the height of the start of the next section. So the height of this bit will be remembered and carried on to be the same as the height of this bit. To make that a bit clearer, I'll just draw a paint diagram. So each of these is going to be a piece of ground. A chunk is some number of pieces of ground. And I'm going to make each chunk 5 pieces for the moment. So if I just copy this and paste, so that's the next chunk and the next chunk. Each of these is a chunk. And we create gaps by deactivating a certain number. So say these two are the gaps in this chunk. Gap is here in this chunk, and perhaps all those are a gap in the next chunk. And I'm gonna do it so that this will be some height, and then the end of this chunk and the beginning of the next up to the end of the gap will be a different height, and the same with this will again be a different height. Hopefully that made it a bit clearer. Open your Infinite Roller project if you haven't already and the scene, and then open the chunk script. First we are going to create a new method that will randomise the height of a section of pieces. So a section is a part of a chunk. I'm going to make a private method which returns an int called randomise section height. I'm just going to add a comment above this. So this will randomise the height of a section of pieces. So this method is going to have a parameter passed into it called current random height, and it's going to return the next random height, which will also be an int. So this is because we need to remember what the height was of the previous chunk, and we need to carry that over into the next chunk. First, before we continue creating this method, I'm going to create a new class variable. Going to be private because we won't need to access it from anywhere else. It's an int and it's going to be called gap end position, because we need to know when the end of the gap is, so that we know when the next section starts. Okay, I'm going to set this in create gaps, because gap end position is num grounds deactivate plus deactivate position. This sum is written in this method as well. So now that we've set this, we can replace these with gap end position. That also means that I can take out num grounds deactivate from there and from there. So inside randomise section height, we need to first loop through the ground pieces. So this is the same as we've done here. We loop and we get the ith child. So remember, each child is one of the ground pieces. And after we've got the child, we want to compare I to the gap end position, because we want to know whether the position of the child is before the end gap position. So let's see, if the child's position is before the end of the gap, set it to current random height, which is the variable that gets passed in here. Okay, so code-wise, that's if I is less than gap end position, then, and I'm going to create a new method to do this. It's going to be set child height so this can also be private, and void because it doesn't need to return anything. And for that we're going to need the child to be passed through, and also the position that we want to set it to. So we create a new vector3 and call it new position. That's a new vector3. The x and the z positions are going to be the positions of the child object. So that's child.position.x. The y is the new ypos variable, and z is child.position.z. And then we need to set the child's position to be this new position. And I'll add another comment above this method. So this will set the height of the child. So we can't just set the y position using something like child.position.y equals ypos, because the x, y and z components of the position can't be set from outside the vector3 class. So instead we have to create a new position with the x and z values that the child already has, but with a new y value, and then we assign that to the child's position. Okay, so next we want to get a new random section height for the rest of the chunk and for the start of the next one. So to do this, in randomise section height, create a new variable. It's an int and call it next random height. And to set this, we're going to create a new method called get random section height. And we're going to want to pass through current random height, so that we can make sure that the new height isn't too different from the old height, to make sure that the character can jump onto it. Okay, So a new private method called this. It needs to return an int because we want to return the next random height, and it has a parameter there which is also an int, and this will randomise the height of a section of pieces. Okay, so first to just go back to the top and create two new const variables. There can be private ints, and there are going to be height lower bound. So this will be the lowest that the height can be, and I'll give it a value of 7 at the moment, and height upper bound, which I'll give a value of 15 for the moment. So next, create a new int variable called next random height, and we're going to assign it the value of the current random height plus a random variable from random.range, and the range will be between the two variables that we just created, so height lower bound and height upper bound. We want to have the possibility of this being either higher or lower than the current random height. So we want this part to be either positive or negative. To do this, create a new variable called sign with a value of 1, and then use if random dot value, which returns a random number between 0 and 1. And if that is more than 0.5, then set sign to be -1 instead. So this means that half the time sign will be positive and half the time sign will be negative. And now we can just multiply the random part of this by sign. To make sure that the ground doesn't move too high up over time or too low down, I'm also going to add a clamp to this. So I'm going to reassign next random height as mathf, which is the maths class, dot clamp, which clamps the value of next random height between plus and minus a specific value, which we will create in a moment. So this takes the value that we want to clamp, which is next random height, and a minimum value and a maximum value of that. So it's going to be between minus random height clamp val, and I'll create that in a moment. It's going to be between plus and minus of that. And I'm going to give it a value of 14 for the moment. So one of the reasons we want to do this is that this will allow us to have a constant value for the game over height. So remember, in game controller, we use a constant variable, game over height, which we will need to change the value of in a minute, to check if the character has died. By clamping the next random height, we can ensure that we'll never go below a game over height. So we won't just die when we're still trying to play the game. I'll just write that as a comment. So clamp the values to make sure it doesn't go too high up or down. And this means we can use a constant value to check if the game's over. Okay. We also need to return this random variable that we've created. Okay, so go back to the randomise section height method. Now that we've got our next random height, we want to set it as the height of the children that come after the gap. So we want to add an else statement to the if. So this is when we reach the end of the gap, you use the next random height instead. Okay, so else. Oh, and I've forgotten to actually pass anything in here. So that should be child and current random height. And in here, I'm going to set child height, and this time it's going to be child and next random height that we pass through. Now I need to create another new method, but this one's going to be public because we want to call it from the terrain generator class. This one's going to be called randomise section, and inside we're going to call create gaps, and we have to do that first because we set gap end position inside create gaps, and the gaps need to have been created before we can use gap end position in randomise section height. So now we can assign the next random height as randomise section height, and we'll pass in the current random height again, which will also be passed into this method. So the terrain generator, where we'll call this, will keep track of what the current random height is. And we also want to return the next random height. Now open the terrain generator and create a new variable called current random height, and start it off with a value of 0. This is also an int because it's the same as this current random height. So we want to keep track of it across different chunk objects, because we need to keep track of the current height of the ground pieces so that it can be used for the next chunk's height to be calculated. And it's initialized to 0 because that's the initial height that we want. So next, inside start, we want to replace this next chunk dot create gaps with next chunk dot randomise section, passing in the current random height, which is 0 to start with. This method also returns the next random height. We also want to assign it to this current random height variable. So this will create random gaps and randomise the height. Going to want to do the same thing in the update method so that we randomise it as the character goes along. So comment out next chunk dot create gaps again and copy and paste this bit in here. Save both scripts now, and let's go back to Unity and see if we have any errors. we do. Not all code paths return a value. So I've just forgotten to put the return statement in this, so that's what the error is. So for this I want to return next random height, and hopefully that should fix it. Yeah. So let's see if everything worked properly. Oop. So we've got a higher bit there, that's good. I'll try again. Oh, okay, that's something we're going to need to fix. We want to reinitialize the position of these when we restart the game, because otherwise bad things can happen, like you saw, where the character starts off underneath. Okay, I'm just going to pause there and check that this is doing what we want. So the end of previous chunk here is the same height as the start of this one, and the end of, or the start of this one is the same height as the end of this one. So that looks good at the moment. Let's just make sure it carries on like that. So again, this is the same height as that, which is good, and hopefully, yep. Okay, that looks good. There are a few things that we should change though. So I've actually, in between tutorials, I've moved the camera back a bit. So if you go to main camera and change this size, you can see it moves the camera closer or further away to your character. So I changed mine to 18 so that I can just see a bit more of the terrain. Also, I think the character's moving a bit slowly, so go to forward speed and increase it to maybe 30. Let's try that and see if it's a bit better. Okay, that's going a bit faster. I think that's good. Okay. I'm also going to go into game controller and change this game over height to -15 to make sure that we don't end the game when the terrain is just a bit low. We want to make sure that it's actually when a character has fallen through a gap that the game ends. Okay, so save that and then go to the terrain generator script, because we need to change what restarts. Okay, so create a new method called it'll be private void and reposition sections, because it's not just the chunks that we want to reposition, we also want to reposition the squares that make up the chunks. So I'll give this a comment as well. Reset each child section. So inside this, we're going to reset the positions of each chunk. So that will be previous chunk dot, and this will be a new method that we'll actually create in a moment. So reset child positions, and the same for current chunk and next chunk. We're also going to need to reset the current random height variable to 0, because that's what it is initially. And a comment. And we want to randomize the height of next chunk in the same way as we do in start. So we need to add this line again. And then we want to call this reposition sections from restart. Okay, so now save the script and copy this new method that we're going to make. Go to chunk and create this public void method. So for this we need to do something similar to this, where we go through each child, and for each child we want to reset the height to 0, which is where it is initially. So to do this we just need to call our setChildHeight method, pass through the child, and 0 for the height. So this goes through each child game object and sets the height to 0. Okay, so make sure all of the scripts have been saved. Go back to Unity and let's see how that worked. I think the speed's better now. Looks good. I'm going to fall off on the lower one and make sure if the game ends, which it does. And if I restart, then it restarts at the 0 position, which means that the character will always be above it. Okay, so that's good. I think that these chunks are a bit long now though, so I'm going to go to chunk and change chunk size to 25 instead. And let's see how that looks. Because it was a bit too easy before. Might need to tweak that again, but I think this is better than it was before. Yeah. Okay. So save your scene and your project. So in this tutorial we've made the terrain height random to make the game more interesting. Next time we'll add scoring and keep track of the player's high score. Remember, you can download the files for this tutorial at edgeofcode.com on the downloads page, and I'll see you next time.